Hey everyone, welcome back to Dubai Rapid Round 8. This is a penultimate round, and coming into this round, I was 5 out of 7. And if the title didn't give it away, we did go into a Stafford Gambit, but not a Stafford Gambit accepted. My opponent thought for a little bit after knight c6 and decided to turn down the gambit and play knight f3. Now, I have received occasional comments and requests of what to do when the opponent declines a Stafford. And I know some people are maybe a bit annoyed when the opponent doesn't take on c6, which I will say right away, if you're a Stafford Gambit player as black and your opponent plays knight f3, it's already an opening success. Black just regains the pawn and has a slight lead in development. Now, I actually covered this position in a previous video. It was going over the game between Hao Yifan and Daniil Dubov when Dubov played the Stafford Gambit, one of the first super GMs ever to do so in a serious game. And he won a nice one after the move d3 from Hao Yifan. In this game, my opponent played d4, which is one of the most common moves. Now, another move which I'll quickly just show because there's a cool line is if white plays knight c3, black can play d5 and just reinforce the knight and create a situation where if takes, black is already doing quite well, initiative against the knight, and there's not a great response for white, either knight g1 or queen e2. Both moves have their drawbacks. And there's actually another video on YouTube by the YouTube channel, the Chess Website, and they cover a line which goes queen e2, and then black has a cool piece sacrifice after bishop to b4, pawn d3, oh no, my knight. But then black just goes ahead and castles, gives away the knight. And here you would maybe expect something like d4 to try and regain the piece, but d4 there's a3. Instead here black plays pawn takes e4, and if queen takes e4, we win the queen. Probably best move is knight d2, and then there's knight d4, queen d1, bishop g4. Objectively, it's okay for white, but this is kind of the style of the Stafford that we all know and love, going for super aggressive initiative. White would have to take, and then takes here, king d1. Engine will still give a small plus for white, but again, credit to the Chess Website YouTube channel, who goes into this line in a lot more depth. In this game, we're going to see a slightly quieter line with d4. And I play d5, and we reach a position where the pawn structure is completely symmetrical, but I'm basically up to tempi as black because I already have a knight well placed in the center on e4, and my knight's developed on c6. So going forward from here, it's about how I can try and maximize my slight lead in development and get some early initiative. So here my opponent plays bishop d3, I play bishop g4, developing and pitting the knight, having some idea to take the pawn on d4. My opponent plays c3, and I continue with aggression, queen to f6, not only pressuring the pinned knight on f3, but getting ready to castle queenside. This is actually very typical in like these Stafford Gambit Declined positions. It's to castle queenside and then try and access e-file as quickly as possible, especially when white hasn't castled yet. And here my opponent was probably a little bit afraid of me taking and giving double pawns on the king side and went ahead and played bishop to e2. The more natural move here is knight to d2, which I was expecting. And this allows a few things. I could take and then take on f3 and force the double pawns. But even stronger here is just a castle and essentially sacrifice a pawn on e4. Now, it's not good for white to take it. For example, if knight takes e4, pawn takes e4, bishop takes e4, black is already winning material by force after rook e8, pinning the bishop and attacking the bishop. This would force queen e2, and then really nice move queen e7, creating the battery, preparing some f5 move. And if white plays bishop to d3 here, there's a really nice tactic that I found earlier with the help of Stockfish. But I'll give it to the viewers. This is black to move and find the beautiful way to win material. Feel free to pause the video if you need more time to find the move. But the move is knight takes d4, just a beautiful resource. hitting the queen, hitting the knight, and all the tactics work out for black. If pawn digs d4, there's a nice shot queen b4, discovered attack on the queen, and this is pinning the queen, so there's no queen d2. If bishop d2, we take the queen with check, and black would go up a queen. And what else can white do here? Queen digs e7, we just take back with check, and we're winning some more material on f3 with a really nice position. So that would have been a nice line if my opponent played the most natural move. But after bishop e2, I just continue to develop and improve with bishop d6. And here my opponent plays a double attack, queen to b3, hitting two undefended pawns. But I'm not really afraid in this position because I have such a big lead in development. Even if white wins a pawn, it's going to take more time, and the more time white wastes without developing pieces and getting the king safe, the more chances I'll have to attack. And I very simply castle queenside in this position, hovering b7, getting the rook to the d file. And yeah, I can say that this move probably just runs into so much trouble. Here the engine recommends a really nice shot, knight takes f2, idea king takes f2, bishop g3, winning the queen in style. So when I queenside castled, I knew that there were going to be some tactics in the air. And already on move 9, white is severely behind development. I have all my minor pieces developed, my king castled, my queen developed, and things are looking really good right from the get-go. But it's not over, as we're going to see. Opponent plays bishop to e3. I play rook e8, knight b d2, and here I play bishop to f4. I'm again trying to be as aggressive as possible, trying to create a situation where it will be very easy for white to go wrong. And there are a lot of ways for white to just lose material in this position. For example, if castling, this just walks into knight takes d2, and something is going to hang in the end, given that this bishop is pinned to e2, along with a knight. Actually, both minor pieces are pinned to the e2 bishop, and black is just winning a lot of material here. So after bishop f4, my opponent played knight takes e4, which is the best move. We trade on e4, and now knight to g1. And even though it looks like really, really ugly for black, white is trying to create some sort of fortress and make it difficult for me to break through. And I realized here that if I just trade on e2 or e3, it really just helps white solidify the position. And I figured it would be best to retreat my light squared bishop to e6, hit the queen, keep initiative. I force the queen back to c2. And here I played a move which I thought was really nice in the moment, queen to h6, creating pressure against the bishop on e3, trying to provoke the exchange where then maybe later I could play pawn e3. It turns out I missed an even stronger idea to take on e3 right away, and after f takes e3, play the move queen to h6, which very simply targets e-pawn. And it's a clear weakness in white's position, which perhaps looks easy to defend with a move like queen d2. But after a really nice move, knight e7, I'm coming with knight d5 or knight f5. And if white loses e3, then the whole position will very likely collapse. If white wants to defend e3, then king f2 will probably need to be played, but that just looks terrible. So I missed the opportunity to take on e3, and after queen h6, my opponent showed that he still has some life left, played the move queen d2. And here the difference is that when I take on e3, white doesn't have to take back with the pawn, but rather can take back with the queen. And this is a position where I don't want to trade queens because that would just kill my chances to attack in the middle game. And I played the move queen g6. And I was still feeling really comfortable here because the queen on e3 is a blockader. And as we know in chess, queens do not like to be the one blockading pawns, just because if they're attacked, they basically have to move. And I still have the idea of playing f5, maneuvering the knight to d5. I was very optimistic, but opponent found some nice moves. Played queen to g3, offering a queen trade. I said no thanks. And now queen e3, again offering a queen trade. Again, I said no thank you. and now pawn g3. So we did a little bit of a dance here. I moved back to f6, and here pawn h4 was played, which is again a slightly annoying move because white is preparing to play queen g5, which would force a queen trade. So again, I politely said no thank you, played pawn h6. And sometimes in these positions, it requires preventive play to secure the longer term advantage. So h6, even though it's a slow move, it is preventing white's main idea, and I'm still questioning how white will complete development. Knight h3 was played, the only developing move for the knight. And this actually gave me an interesting decision because it looks like the knight is not so happy, but it's about to come to life with knight f4. And I thought for a little bit here and decided to take on h3. And even though this gives away a nice central bishop, it does misplace white's rook. I thought I would get a situation where eventually I'll play queen e6, f5, and just have a really nice structure against white's bishop and just better pieces in white overall. So here I did play queen e6. Opponent played queen f4, which is a tricky move. I was imagining my opponent playing this move and saying, oh no, my rook. Of course, I can't take the rook because bishop g4. So we can say the rook is defended by tactics. And bishop g4 is a major threat here. So played the very simple move, king to b8. And bishop g4 was still played. I moved my queen away. And now queen to f5. So again, this pesky queen trying to trade. Of course, from white's perspective, it makes sense to go into an endgame where longer term, maybe the bishop could potentially be better than the knight. So I slide back. And here I am offering a pawn on f7. However, if white takes the pawn, there are a few different ways to continue. There's actually a really nice move here, knight e5, which I don't know if I saw in the game. Of course, Stockfish is pointing it out here, which is essentially a major fork, not only against the queen and bishop, also threatening knight d3. And white can't really get away with taking it because after queen d2, king f1, rook f8 is lights out for white, skewering the queen and the eventual mating square on f2. White would have to just lose a queen here or play a move like rook d1, and then I'll be up the exchange with still a lot of pressure on f2, e3 coming. So long story short, f7 is a poison pawn. My opponent made a good decision, didn't take it, but rather castle queenside. And here comes kind of a more strategic battle where we were both getting pretty low on time. We can see already my opponent has just over a minute left. I was below 4 minutes. And the next many moves came pretty quickly. A lot of the moves are like solidifying and improving moves from both sides. I played queen e7, now defending the pawn. I had the idea of eventually playing g6 and f5, which did happen after rook h1, g6, queen b5, f5. Now, I will say this is a common type of principle in chess. When you have a knight versus a bishop, and these are the only minor pieces on the board, usually it makes sense to put your pawns on the same color as the opponent's bishop, just to restrict the bishop. Now, this would be different if I had a light square bishop. I would want my pawns on dark squares, but in this situation, I'm very happy that my pawns can essentially dominate the light square bishop, and white had to sadly retreat back to e2. I play queen d6 here, just improving the queen, trying to have some scope of either playing e3 or f4, which I thought will ultimately be the way I make progress here. Opponent played king to b1. I played queen f6. Rook e1 was played, rook e7. So in a rapid game especially, moves like queen f6 and rook e7, they're not the most forcing or aggressive moves, but they're very easy moves to play, which don't really change the overall structure or dynamic of the position in any way. And I was really just trying to maximize the pressure against my opponent and wait for the right opportunity to strike. My opponent here plays f4, which could be considered a slight positional mistake because it essentially gives me a really strong defended passed pawn. Probably would have been better to leave the pawn back on f2, but f4 was played. I play rook e d7, queen a4, and now knight to e7. So again, I'm just trying to make gradual improvements. Had some idea of maneuvering the knight either to d5 or to c8, and then eventually to b6 to keep my king safe and also to target the queen. Opponent plays queen to b3. I play knight c8. I was half hoping for bishop a6 here, which looks to be really aggressive, but just walks into queen takes a6. Of course, my opponent did not blunder a bishop, played pawn a4. And here I finally go ahead with the kingside pawn break, pawn g5. And given that my opponent is below a minute, I thought now's the time to try and complicate things a little bit on the king side. White took, I took, and rook to f1. Nice move, very solid, creating a scenario where I don't want to take because then after rook takes f4, my f-pawn is a backwards pawn and rook tf1 could come and I could possibly lose a pawn here. So instead, I left the tension, played rook to g7. And the point of this move is I'm waiting for white to take because if white goes ahead and takes on g5, I take back with rook, and I can make the argument that g3 is a bigger weakness than f5. f5 is already well defended, g3 is undefended and very easy to put more pressure on. So yeah, we left the tension. Opponent played queen to b5. Nifty move, attacking laterally against f5. I played knight d6, hitting the queen, defending f5. And now queen to e5. Again, going for the queen trade. And yet again, I don't want to trade queens because if I take, it can really help improve white's structure. So I just slide over to g6. And here my opponent played g4. And this is where things start getting really spicy, just given all the pawn tension. And I didn't really have much time to calculate all the nuanced variations here. So I played what looks to be a very intuitive move, rook e8, counterattacking white's queen on e5. And my opponent surprised me here a little bit, and instead of moving the queen, took on f5, counterattacking my queen. And when this move was played, I thought it was just a massive mistake. I very quickly take back with my knight. And now if we see the queen is attacked, and I'm threatening knight to e3 with a fork of the rooks. So here I just assumed I'm winning, and my opponent clearly wasn't happy, and after a little bit of thought, moved back to b5, and I happily played knight e3 and won the exchange. It turns out in this position, after knight takes f5, white has a miracle move, which I only just discovered from Stockfish. It's amazing the resources Stockfish can point out after a game like this. But this is white to move and equalize. There's only one move, which just doesn't lose on the spot. And it's a pretty incredible move. If you don't see it already, feel free to pause the video and think. But it turns out that white does not have to move the queen, but rather can unleash yet another counterattack, bishop to h5. And I'm very happy my opponent didn't play this move because it would have flustered me a good deal, given that now both queens are hanging. If I take the bishop, white can happily take on f5, and it looks like the pawn tension on the king side, if anything, is going in white's favor because my g-pawn is pinned, my e4 pawn is potentially weak. Black's just not better here. Another cool line is if I take the queen on e5, yeah, white could take back on g6 and it would be a trade, but even better for white is pawn takes e5, not recapturing the queen, but threatening mate in 1. And it turns out white's just completely winning here. There's no good way to defend against the double threat from white. Now I do have the move queen e6, but this would walk into rook d8, queen c8, takes, and bishop g4 in the end. And white's winning the piece on f5 if I defend fg5, and there's no saving the knight, which is pinned to my king and pinned to my rook. So this could have easily happened if my opponent found bishop h5, but I'm very thankful the tactics gods were on my side. So after I took on f5, my opponent missed the opportunity, played queen to b5, which looks like it hits a rook, but the rook's defended, and I happily go into e3, forking the rooks on the first rank. Opponent takes, I take a rook, takes, and from this point forward, it was just a matter of cleanup and not blundering anything. I do have an extra rook for a bishop. This pawn is weak, and we'll see the technique here. First, I make Luft, hit the queen, force the queen away. Played king a7. I could have taken on g5, but this would allow bishop a6. So I didn't want to be in any rush, just giving white no chances of counterplay. Opponent plays king to a1, take, queen c4, rook d7. A lot of these moves were just a matter of conserving time and not getting too low. Now here's a moment where I want to trade queens because I'm up material. Opponent said no thank you. So there were a lot of polite declining of queen trades this game from both sides. Here I go ahead, play e3, pawn a5, and queen g2. And I figured that if white won't trade queens with me, I might as well use my queen as a weapon. I hit the bishop, trying to make progress with my deadly passed e-pawn. Opponent throws in a check, king b1, and now queen c4, defending the bishop. And here it's a matter of just trying to remove the blockade on e2. And to do that, I slide over to the f-file, going for rook to f2. Opponent plays bishop to d3, and I play rook to e7, just fully optimizing both rooks. Pawn d5, and now I play pawn e2. It felt like my e-pawn was Moses crossing the Red Sea. Opponent now tries to blockade on e1, but I have the nice move rook to f1. And even though white is technically controlling f1 3 times, once with the rook, but then also twice with X-ray vision, I can afford to play rook f1 because if white takes, I have rook e1 to win the bishop in the end. So yeah, tactics were on my side here. So after rook f1, my opponent played pawn d6, kind of a desperation move. I took on e1, king a2, took on d6, bishop f5, rook c7. And I do have to give credit to my opponent for finding the one last trick in the position, played the move queen to g8. And I will say, if I was in white's shoes, I would have done the same. And for anyone thinking that black should just play king a7 and be happy, you would then blunder your queen on g2. So thankfully, I saw I could just take the queen, and my opponent promptly resigned. Now, I will say this was a bit reminiscent of what Carlsen tried to do against me. The one time I beat him in chess 960. Queen f1, I take it. Good try. Good try. Queen f1, very sneaky. He played a very similar move, hitting my king, hitting my queen from afar. And thankfully, in this game and in that game, I spotted the right move, take the free queen, and force my opponent to resign. So that was round 8. My opponent got into trouble in the opening from a Stafford Gambit Declined. Probably the takeaway for my opponent is to learn to accept the Stafford and try and punish the opening for next time. But even though I got a good position, it took a lot of work to convert, and my opponent did defend well and almost fully recovered from really, really bad opening. So this game put me at 6 out of 8 points in the tournament, going into the 9th and final round. And stay tuned for the recap of round 9. If I win round 9, there were some cash prizes on the line, and I did have a really fun game to finish off the tournament. As always, if you have questions, comments, feedback, leave them in the comments below. I do look forward to seeing your comments, and I'll see you in the next video.